Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome those of you who have joined us in the past for our Public Cloud Market Landscape webinar, and for those of you who are joining us for the first time, welcome as well. Today we're going to be presenting our webcast Social Capabilities, API Management, and Industry Customization, outlining performance, leaders and laggards, and future trends as reported in our Cloud Public Market Landscape reports and profiles, and explaining the factors influencing the public cloud market. I'm Allison Crawford, Senior Marketing Manager here at TBR, and I will be your host for today's session. The evolution of the public cloud market is picking up steam as vendors are moving critical business functions onto the cloud. As the adoption curve moves past early adoption to early majority, both traditional firms and cloud pure plays are aligning their portfolios to capitalize on customer demand. We'll explain what this corporate jockeying of position will mean to you in the coming months. But before I pass this over to Jillian and Allan, there are a few logistics I'd like to cover. First, we're recording today's session and posting it on our YouTube site, TBRI channel. We encourage you to visit this channel to watch this presentation or any of the others we've posted. Second, we'd like to hear your opinions and thoughts on the materials we're presenting. Please send any questions or comments to the Q&A or chat function. We'll address them at the end of the presentation. Or you can request an inquiry call if you have additional questions. Third, we'll send out the slides to everyone registered for today's webcast within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. You can also find the slides as well as other thought leadership pieces, webinar decks, and commentaries on SlideShare at www.slideshare.net/market_market_insight. And I'll be presenting these guys all the social media links at the end of the presentation. Thank God it's Wednesday. It's been a long day, kids. With that, let me introduce Jillian Mirandi and Allan Krans. Jillian has been spearheading our public cloud research and is the lead author of this program. Allan has been covering and writing about the software market for over 7 years and is leading our research coverage in private hybrid cloud. Together, their strategic advice is helping several of the largest cloud vendors identify new opportunities and revenue streams. And with that, let me hand this over to Allan.
Great. Thanks, Allison. Thanks, everybody, for attending today. So as we get started, I wanted to take you through some of our perspectives around cloud. We'll highlight some of the overall trends that we're seeing across the portfolio, because we are seeing this transition much more into a holistic cloud approach, both on the customer side and the vendor side. So it's exciting to be able to highlight both the public cloud insights, but also the transition we see occurring as private and hybrid cloud adoption increases. So first, we wanted to highlight just our portfolio, the ways that we're analyzing cloud. So it's really a 3-track approach. So first, we're writing semi-annual reports on the leading 24 vendors in the cloud space. So this spans public, private, hybrid. They focus on the vendors, and they draw from both some of the pure play public cloud vendors that are driving the market that we'll highlight today, as well as the traditional vendors and the SIs that have multiple different plays around cloud, bridging from delivering services themselves to integration points to delivering value through professional services to clients that accelerate their adoption. The big green box in the middle is where a lot of our insight today will come from. We're writing benchmark reports that pull in not only the vendors that we're writing ongoing reports on, but the broader landscape. So looking at bigger collections of companies in the public cloud space, it's 40 vendors, as well as we've added a managed private cloud and professional service benchmark that takes an SI view at both the professional services as well as those managed private cloud services that span the gap from public to fully private. So there's that benchmark, as well as a components benchmark that we're in the process of launching, which looks at the markets that are being made, delivering the hardware, software, services that enable both the enterprise customers and the large cloud providers to actually deliver those services. So it's the arms dealers that are selling into those providers, big space that we're launching a benchmark around to provide more insight for the role of the servers, networking, storage, as well as the management software that really make clouds happen on the back end. Lastly, we're taking a look at the customer landscape, taking the same perspective with a private, hybrid, professional services view to get a view into both the levels of customer adoption that supports our market projections, but also looking at the assessment of vendors, rolling that back into our vendor-focused coverage of cloud so that we get a reality check for, in the market, how customers are actually perceiving the value propositions and the offerings that the vendors we're covering through the reports and benchmarks, how that's actually being perceived. So it's really an end-to-end portfolio that goes deep on vendor coverage, gets broader with the benchmarks to provide the market landscape, and then has that customer view to really validate and sense check what we're seeing from the vendor side. To provide a little bit more detail around those offerings, we've laid out the 24 vendors that we're writing semi-annual reports on today. You get a clear view of the benchmarks that we're writing in their delivery schedule. So today we'll focus on the public cloud landscape, and then as well our delivery schedule for the customer research tracks. So a trend that we're seeing overall, and it's reflected in that customer track, is in public cloud we see a transition of the market from a really technology-focused segment, which lends itself to a lot of customer interview about adoption, value proposition, use cases. We're seeing it transition much more to the business model side about how best to operationalize the assets that have been either acquired or built in public cloud. So that's where our focus is transitioning. We're going to continue to really dive deep on the business model part through the vendor reports and benchmarks, and then look ahead in terms of customer adoption as the transition occurs to more private cloud-focused spending, as well as the shift towards integration and the ultimate endpoint we see being hybrid cloud, and how that's best delivered, managed, and secured. So here we've laid out some of the trends that we're covering across all elements of cloud that we're looking at. So we've hit a little bit on the transition we see occurring on the public cloud space, transitioning much more to a business model-led approach. And when you look at the coverage that we have in terms of 40 vendors here, it really spans the gamut, and we see it harder and harder for vendors to not have some type of public cloud play. It's going to be important from a technology perspective, a business model perspective. We see it more and more as a requirement to have an end-to-end portfolio, that some public cloud assets where it makes sense, and most large vendors have risen to that occasion, have some play in that space. For the private and hybrid cloud, this is where we see more of first the technology transition, but the business model transition coming as well. We see large vendors. I just came back from the Microsoft conference, and they're already messaging about the future, about how they're uniquely positioned to tie all of these different types of clouds together, whether it's public, private, or delivered through a partner. Having a consistent platform is a differentiator, that they're highlighting, but we see similar approaches with vendors like IBM. More and more focus here about how to tie together, whether it's public, private, or partner delivered, so that it's a consistent hybrid model is the end state that we see the vendors working towards. So we're tying that in through the different benchmarks and the company reports, but more and more an increasing focus on, yes, delivering public cloud, but also pulling in those other elements, because it's going to be, we think, a critical success factor for vendors that really capitalize on cloud over the longer term. For the alliances, again, we see more consolidation, more knitting together multiple different offerings, and we've seen that play out in both acquisitions and alliances. Particularly, we've seen an increase in that over the past, over the course of 2013. We see vendors like Microsoft and Oracle working together in somewhat of a unique alliance, an increase in terms of the acquisition of cloud integrators, cloud-delivered assets that provide a common platform is something that we see a real need for on the customer side as they look to, they've already, built out to some degree the amount of offerings. The next transition is how to integrate them together and manage that in a cohesive fashion. And then Jill will touch on this a little bit more in depth, so I won't go too deep there, but increasing segmentation of cloud on the public cloud side, so where it makes sense, where there's unique needs, building out vertically focused clouds is, kind of that next logical transition from these broad platforms that we've seen really drive the market today. So those are some of the high-level trends that we're covering across the portfolio. With that, I'll hand it over to Jill, and we can dive into the public cloud space for this quarter.
Thanks, Allison and Allan, and thank you guys all for being here this afternoon. As you can see from this graph, we've been covering cloud for quite some time, and we see over the past year or so that public cloud market has begun to grow at an increasing pace. Now, this is due to a few different factors, but maturity really plays a huge role into why, the market is continuing to grow at a rapid pace and even increasing that growth rate. So market makers, Amazon Web Services and Salesforce.com, they both started around 2006, and they were loud, they knew what they were doing, all about public cloud, and they have been extremely successful and have really made the market for these public cloud vendors. From there's been a lot of newer public cloud and cloud vendors, so Workday, ServiceNow, these vendors, are really killing it, and going to their conferences, the customers just are so excited about that technology. They love what the companies are doing. They have great ecosystems, and, we really see them as continuing to take off and, just grabbing a lot of market share. And then there's the traditional vendors who are a little bit later to market, but who have now fully embraced public cloud and cloud in general. From the SAPs, Oracles, Microsoft, migrating applications and offering them through a public cloud to IBM and HP offering public cloud platforms and infrastructure. So the success of the early market vendors, excitement about the new vendors, and the traditional IT vendors all getting into cloud has really instilled a confidence within the entire market, and we think that, that's a huge driver. Also, ecosystems is another play that is going to continue to drive revenue. So partner ecosystems and developer ecosystems built, around these specific vendors, so Google, Amazon, ServiceNow. These ecosystems will play a key role in driving cloud adoption and in helping to customize the cloud. So essentially, cloud, it's not just for bleeding edge adopters. It's entrenched itself in the enterprise and, is definitely there to stay.
And just to play off that, some of the things that we've seen that I think contribute to the continued growth of public cloud, we're continually updating this market projection, but some of the things that we've seen that play into that and kind of change the role of cloud are, in many cases, and we've seen this for on the systems management side with some of the HR offerings, that the functionality has gotten to a point where there's real it's not just a cost comparison, it really is a functionality comparison that in many cases is winning the case for cloud-delivered solutions rather than traditional on-premise solutions. So I think you've seen that erosion increase a bit and really challenge some of the traditional on-premise delivered solutions in a lot of cases, not just because of the difference in the cost model, but on a functionality basis, on a manageability basis, that there's benefits there that are delivered through these public cloud offerings that really weren't perhaps anticipated or intended in the early days of the market. The products have gotten to a point where we're starting to see that as a driver for adoption rather than the typical cost-based comparison that led the early growth in the market.
Just a few last points about this slide. So it's made up of the three major buckets that we look at inside of public cloud are infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Now, starting from the bottom up, infrastructure as a service, we see a pretty steady growth there, and we think ultimately this market will be dominated by fewer players. So like it is today, maybe 10 or so players. Amazon Web Services, definitely. Google Compute Engine, we think is going to grow pretty quickly in coming years. IBM, as well as the telcos have a huge presence here. So AT&T and Verizon, are really helping to grow that market. The middle layer is platform as a service. So we think this layer will remain relatively small monetarily. However, we think that it's the stickiest layer of the three. We think this because it's vital to both the SaaS and infrastructure players, as well as for integration. So from a infrastructure as a service point of view, aside from sheer compute and storage capacity, they really need that layer for businesses to drive their ecosystems. So for developers and partners to build businesses on top of their platform, on top of their infrastructure. And then from a software as a service point of view, a lot of the SaaS vendors are now incorporating some sense of platform for test and development, but also for customization. So now that software as a service is really entrenched throughout the enterprise, those enterprise customers demand customization, so that is definitely key. And once you build the customizations, build your business on a certain platform linked to a certain vendor, until the next big thing comes along, you're likely not going to switch. So that PaaS layer, is definitely key, and we're actually seeing a lot of roll-ups in the space. Now, the SaaS segment, we think, will continue to dominate revenue-wise. So again, both from new application vendors as well as from traditional vendors, now offering their applications through the public cloud. This slide, it goes a little bit deeper into software as a service. So it shows the top workloads that the market has migrated to cloud. So, the obvious one, CRM with Salesforce, Dynamics is in there. Accounting, I'm thinking Intuit, HRM with Workday. So out of the SaaS adopters, 25% of those people have already migrated those three workloads. And this is just a shorter version of the list, but there is, many more workloads within that 10 to 25 range that people, now are beginning to migrate. So that's just kind of the comfort around the cloud, more vendors is just driving more adoption in SaaS. Let me orient you to this slide. It depicts the 41 vendors we cover in the public cloud market landscape. So the x-axis is the year-to-year corporate revenue growth. The y-axis is year-to-year public cloud revenue growth. And the size of the bubble represents the volume of public cloud revenue. So now that the market is maturing, we've really seen vendors kind of falling into these three distinct buckets, based on kind of their backgrounds and where they're going. So the first bucket is the traditional IT players, so anywhere from, software, hardware, and mixtures of the two. So over the past 4 or 5 quarters, we've seen a real slowdown in this traditional IT market. So either the growth rate is slowing or companies are contracting altogether. So what they've been doing is really they've been migrating some of their applications to the cloud as well as offering cloud infrastructure. So public cloud, was the first and likely easiest way for them to begin to get into cloud. And now we think these vendors are, I think in the private cloud and the self-built private cloud market, they have a real opportunity there. So it shows how their corporate growth is really lagging behind, and how they're using cloud to eventually, speed that growth back up and remain, relative inside their customer bases. The middle bucket, it's Google, Amazon Web Services, and Rackspace. Now, these aren't traditional software hardware vendors, but they do have, they are large businesses that didn't necessarily start off in public cloud. So Google and Amazon have extremely large internet-based businesses, and Rackspace started off as hosting. So whereas their corporate revenue, their revenue growth, is somewhat in the middle, we see for the cloud growth, that is picking up, and that will, start driving corporate growth even more. The last bucket is the pure play cloud vendors. So your Workdays, RightScale, GoGrid, Joyent. And in this bucket, we see two different business models. So the first one with Workday, ServiceNow, they're really taking market share from the traditional application vendors. So Workday is taking customers from the Oracles, the SAPs of the world. ServiceNow is taking share from the BMC, CA, HPs of the world. And then you have companies who are making a business off of the new trends altogether. So RightScale is a good example of that. They manage all of your different cloud environments and integrate them together. So whereas this wasn't a need probably 2 years ago, it's increasingly becoming a pain point across customers, and RightScale is right there to monetize that.
And this is a market that we've seen increasing interest. Some of it's ecosystem specific to each ecosystem. There are a number of vendors around Microsoft that provide these capabilities in terms of being that cloud intermediary between the services, the management, the identity management, all those things that aren't as prominent of pain points as customers have a handful of cloud services. But as they become more ingrained, as the number of services grows, these are things that are cropping up that will increase the overall size of the cloud market significantly as all those capabilities are provided around it. So we see things like security management as big opportunities to build around this public cloud adoption that we're highlighting today. And a number of vendors are already there, as Jill highlights. We see more of them coming into play, as well as being components of the large cloud platforms themselves. We see both business models working in this space in terms of building it into products, as well as there's enough white space there to come in and provide standalone services and offerings that meet that need in the market.
This slide depicts the percentage of public cloud revenue of total revenue. So it starts with, the vast majority or entire business is public cloud driven. And we think that these companies represent, or represented, a few of them now we think have too high of price tags. But these are good acquisition targets for the rest of the group who, the majority has under 6% or under 5% even of their revenue coming from public cloud. So there's a few things that have been happening. We think in 2012 was the first major roll-up. So infrastructure as a service vendors were purchased, Savvis and OpSource. Human capital management vendors, Taleo, SuccessFactors, and Ripple were all bought. And marketing cloud vendors, Buddy Media and Eloqua were purchased. Now, since the end of 2012, it's been pretty quiet until June. And we think June really is setting the stage for a second major roll-up to come. Two of the largest public cloud acquisitions to date occurred last month. So Salesforce acquired cloud-based marketing automation vendor and longtime partner ExactTarget for $2.5 billion. And IBM acquired infrastructure as a service vendor SoftLayer for an estimated $2 billion. So right there, $4.5 billion went into public cloud investment. So that's huge, and also from two extremely different companies. So it just, goes to show that, as we do believe the market's maturing, there's still a lot of shakeout that's going to happen and a lot of transformation through acquisitions. Now, there's also smaller acquisitions that are happening, and especially in the platform space. So in April, 2 of the 4 leading API management vendors, Mastery and Layer 7, were acquired by Intel and CA Technologies. We believe API management is really on the rise due to the need of cloud standards, mobile and social integration, and just the vastly increasing amount of data out there that partners and developers will be able to leverage, as well as for vendors to create additional revenue. So we believe the next wave of acquisitions will be, again, around infrastructure as a service. So GoGrid, Joyent are great targets. We think Rackspace, they are quite large, but we think that they're a potential acquisition target, especially with all their investment in OpenStack. We think, again, API management will be huge. 3Scale and Apogee are potential targets, as well as other platform vendors such as EngineYard. Cloud and IT management, so a RightScale would be, perfect for one of these vendors to acquire. And then smaller investments in BI and analytics. So ServiceNow just purchased Mira42, a partner of theirs. Companies like Good Data. We think with all of, with big data exploding, smaller BI and analytics investments are key to helping customers, get the most out of the data from their cloud vendors. So now that we've walked through the macro public cloud market, I'm going to walk through 3 major trends that we think are influencing the market. Social capabilities, API management, and industry-specific clouds. Adding social capabilities to cloud tools adds value by improving communication and collaboration both internally and externally. We think social capabilities, while they'll add a tremendous amount of value and improve workflow, they won't be directly monetized, but they'll be more of a must-have for customers in looking to purchase their next application. API management is key for platform tools as cloud customers, again, demand more standardization and integration, as well as a lot of these cloud vendors and traditional vendors are opening their APIs to attract those developers and to create the partner ecosystem, so that managing all of that interaction is key. And lastly, industry-specific clouds. So the industry-specific clouds will really drive the next wave of infrastructure as a service adoption. There's still a long way to go in the developing of some of these clouds, so we think 2014-15 is more accurate than it driving growth this year. But we think that'll be big as healthcare, finance, and public sectors really look to modernize their data centers. So now that you have an overview of the 3 macro trends, we'll dive a little bit deeper into each trend and the evolution, really starting with social. So TBR, we think that acquisitions as well as R&D are going to help vendors enter the social enterprise market. We think, again, this is a critical component that will be layered across the portfolios, as well as will help customers integrate with their customers and vendors integrate with the market. So it really is on 2 different levels. It's one, incorporating social into your own workflow, so like Salesforce calls it, creating a social enterprise, as well as communicating with the marketplace. So Salesforce.com, we really think is the leader in enabling these social enterprises, starting with internal social networking platform Chatter, to today embedding social across all of its platforms, from CRM, HR, to social marketing, as well as to its newly launched Communities app. In April, the company launched Communities, and in May, they launched Social. Social.com, it's a pretty new area for Salesforce. So it's a social media advertising platform that allow Marketing Cloud users to connect social advertisements with Salesforce's CRM to publish targeted ads to the right people in real time, all while using the monitoring and analyzing capabilities of Radian6, as well as publishing the ads on Buddy Media. So it really, is that end-to-end social media campaign. We think with the recent acquisition of ExactTarget, so that includes a bit more traditional marketing, such as email, that Salesforce, finally offers that end-to-end marketing cloud. Now, Communities is an application that leverages the Chatter platform, and it allows businesses to connect and collect data from customers and employees and incorporate this data across processes. So the data will go into sales, marketing, all types of content sharing, and R&D. Communities is integrated across Salesforce's platforms, and it really just drives another way for the sales team and for different teams to better understand their customers. I really like to think of this social interaction more or less as a cold calling killer. So I'll give you a personal example. The last time I went to a conference, instead of, walking in and meeting people for the first time and, having no idea who I was speaking with, I tried to get names in advance and really did my own personal social media plan, I guess you could call it. So I obviously Googled the person, and then I went to LinkedIn to see where they came from. Was it a startup? Was it VC? Have they only worked in traditional enterprises? Kind of to figure out, where they're coming from, what they care about. Then, I'll go to Twitter to see what they're talking about there. Do they have strong opinions on Prism, or do they like a certain baseball team? Kind of shedding that personal light on who this person is that I'll meet with. And then lastly, things like Pinterest or any other Google+, any other social outlets where I might glean a bit of information. Now that takes anywhere from half an hour to an hour, but it's extremely useful. But you can't tell your sales team to go and every person they cold call, do this amount of research. So Salesforce actually combines all of that together, spits it out on a nice page, tracks it for you, tracks changes, and then will track your interactions with them. So, you can see it's just a totally new way of doing business. And I think just calling it social is kind of giving it a bad rep because people just associate it with Facebook, but it's really changing how we communicate. Other vendors that are earlier to the market in social, we think are Microsoft. So they've acquired their way in through Yammer and Skype, and they're currently integrating Yammer into Office 365, which is a value add for those customers. SAP also acquired their way in. Jam is from SuccessFactors, so a social media or social networking site. Google has Google+, which we think of as more of a Communities than a Facebook. And then Box. So Box is a good example of a pure play public cloud vendor and who has just been built with inherent social capabilities built in. So we're seeing that across the pure plays. If you build a new application, you're going to have cloud, so it's going to have a cloud deployed version, and you're also just going to build in these social capabilities. So we see it as a real value add, both internally and to speak with the market. The next trend influencing the cloud market, and more so the future of the cloud market, is API management. So exposing APIs is happening much more frequently among cloud vendors, including Amazon, Google, and even Microsoft, and not to mention the open source vendors. Let's back up for a minute. What is an API and API management? So API stands for Application Programming Interface, and API management is really the process around publishing, promoting, and overseeing APIs in a secure and scalable environment. So it really just gives you a place to monitor and understand, where your data is going, who's using it, and what's going on, as opposed to just having it out there in space. API management is key because it helps vendors to manage APIs like products. So again, people are, for the first time, monetizing cloud APIs. They're building ecosystems around them. So that's vital for a lot of these players. It helps to manage the partner ecosystem and to really better understand, again, what's going on. This is key for pure-play cloud providers to build their ecosystems and add a significant revenue channel. But the trend is also relevant for the larger IT vendors who are moving massive amounts of data and APIs to the cloud. By exposing all of this data and APIs, partners are able to build applications using their data, and it really extends connections with social and mobile apps. So we think for the larger IT vendors, they need a mobile channel and they need it really quickly, so they can leverage API management to build the ecosystems to help them develop and connect with all these different endpoints. And lastly, industry customized or vertically customized infrastructure as a service clouds. So we've been talking about how custom clouds will really drive the next wave of cloud adoption in the infrastructure as a service market. And that is coming extremely quickly, especially with the new FedRAMP program. Leaders in this market include Verizon, Amazon Web Services, and at&T. So they have specific groups and specific operations around these different clouds. So Verizon, they've had a federal cloud for quite a while. They've always been big in the public sector. I think around half of Terramark's business was in the public sector, so that again helped Verizon get there. And Verizon also has a number of data centers who are other cloud vendors can colo in to offer clouds to the public sector. Amazon is another early-to-market player. So they launched GovCloud a few years ago. At this point, GovCloud is more or less of a region for them because they recently achieved FedRAMP compliance across some of their clouds. So they are able to be quickly adopted by the federal or public sector. Amazon Web Services, HP, CGI, Lockheed, those are some early FedRAMP vendors. So we see our cloud vendors either partnering with those vendors, trying to get FedRAMP themselves, or partnering with service providers like Lockheed as a channel to get into the public sector. Vertically focused clouds that, a lot of cloud vendors are going to market slightly differently and wrapping a UI around their clouds. So Salesforce and Google, they have government-focused clouds, but we think they're more or less, a different wrapper on the same cloud, which is great, but it's just the Verizon, Amazon are just that much farther ahead. Then a few vendors also have HIPAA compliance. So Microsoft, Verizon, and Amazon, again, thinking 2 to 5 years down the road, the healthcare, there's a lot of pain in healthcare in terms of patient records, sharing data, storing data. So a lot of we think that healthcare is really going to be a large adopter. And that these vendors, are already setting themselves up for success. To wrap it up, So again, we see at a macro level, cloud maturity, vendors from all types of backgrounds getting into cloud, rapid adoption, across SaaS and infrastructure, kind of augmented by that PaaS layer. And then the traditional vendors not only getting into public cloud, but also entrenching themselves with private cloud, those cloud components as a huge opportunity for them.
So with that, I think it's time that we open up the floor to questions. Thanks to those of you who have sent questions through. We encourage you to send any questions you have through now. We'll be answering them as they come in. The first question we have, guys, is how is public cloud going to be impacted as private and hybrid cloud adoption increases?
Sure. So this is Allan. I'll take that one because when we look at the impact to the overall ecosystem, as we look across the different models and from the customer perspective, it's not necessarily an erosionary impact. As you can see from the projections, public cloud continues to grow. We don't think that has a material slowdown as some of the larger customers and mid-market customers transition to private cloud. But what it does is change the dynamic and the purchasing behavior for certain segments and technologies. From our research, we haven't seen if you look at certain workloads that it's not necessarily a public cloud or private cloud. A lot of the workloads we've seen for private cloud adoption were never considered for public cloud for whatever reason. It's not just security, but the characteristics weren't a match for that delivery method. So we do see it as complementary. And then some of the dynamics that we see changing is it becomes more about anticipating a transition to hybrid cloud. So looking at things like integration management, not necessarily at the time of purchase, but building that into that future roadmap so that the integration points are there, the management framework is laid out, and customers have that laid out as they go ahead with different cloud purchases. So I don't think from a market perspective there's a huge impact or detrimental impact to public cloud, but it does change some of the considerations for adoption.
Okay. I just got an IM in from folks. I'm not sure if we're having audio trouble, so we're going to keep going with questions for it's going to run over. For those of you who have lost audio, probably can't hear me, but I apologize. You guys were finishing on API management. Question came in. I'm a little unclear about API management. Who benefits from it, the cloud provider or the enterprise?
So both people really benefit from it. For the cloud providers or the cloud businesses inside the enterprise, API management allows them to open up their APIs and generate revenue through a totally new channel. So it's like with Amazon, they generate more business through the channel than through direct sales. Now, a lot of vendors, they don't really want to continue building tons of applications and doing all the customizations themselves. So they allow partners to develop, and through the API management vendors, they can, kind of make sure those applications are secure, see where they're being used, and then generate the revenue that way. For the enterprise, so for Intel, I really think that they're going to leverage API management in offering it as a kind of a key component of their cloud portfolio. So if I want to buy or build cloud from Intel, that capability will already be, it's already going to be in there. And another thing I brought up was for the enterprises have a ton of data and a ton of APIs. So, they're potentially farther ahead of cloud providers in just the sheer amount of data partners can work with.
Okay, it looks like the original question asker is just on a clarification question. We're going to take that one. We have a couple more in queue. Can you elaborate on how businesses are implementing cloud from a business model perspective?
Enterprise businesses?
So I'll jump in.
So okay. Enterprise businesses, yep. Thanks, Darren.
So this is, I'll comment on this from from a business model perspective. So from a vendor perspective, I'm not sure if that's that's the business model from a provider standpoint that we'd be looking at. And so from that perspective, some of the changes we see in terms of how public cloud fits into that are, Jill hit upon some of the ecosystem that's critically important for scaling out the business model opportunity from a vendor perspective, making sure that the distribution model really makes sense, that it's not a entirely direct sales-led model, and where it is direct sales, that it complements traditional or other assets. I think that's where you see most of the participation from the traditional IT vendors, is fitting cloud in where it makes sense, delivering some additive capabilities, but then leveraging the power of the ecosystem and the other offerings that the vendor has in order to really roll that up, so that it's not a pure competition on costs or the public cloud offerings themselves. I think Amazon has pretty well sucked most of the air out of that market, and we've seen the vendors react by looking at things that differentiate their offerings and that pull in the power of the ecosystem, both from a distribution and from a development standpoint, with that the importance of the API management to create that business opportunity and drive those business models.
Okay. The next question we had come through, guys. Verizon and Microsoft have announced that they will sign a business associate agreement for HIPAA. Has Amazon Web Services also announced their intent to sign a BAA as well?
Yes, Amazon, I believe, in June announced that they would sign BAAs. And I think that was probably, I'm not sure on this, but I think it was probably part of their FedRAMP certification and HIPAA compliancy. But yes, they do now sign those.
Okay. Next question we had come through. Do you envision any potentially disruptive technologies that may impact the growth trajectories?
I think one thing that may impact growth trajectories are the vanilla servers that are being sold into different vendors to offer cloud on the cheap. So I don't know too much about those, but instead of leveraging these large expensive servers to offer cloud services, there's things like HP Moonshot that will enable vendors to offer cloud much more cheaply. I think that has the impact to disrupt some of the trajectories. And I also think the traditional vendors getting into cloud, for some of the pure plays, that could disrupt them because these large vendors just have so much money for acquisitions. They could just pick up and acquire, a lot of the winning companies and kind of disrupt the pure play landscape in that sense.
And I think the other thing that plays to the growth trajectories in a material way is the acceleration of the managed service provider market around cloud, how quickly that business model can really scale out to different tiers of the market is a key element that's built into a lot of our projections for broader adoption of cloud. We see, as Jill said, a real kind of consolidation among the big vendors in terms of the core platforms, but how that's leveraged and distributed through things like API management where they're customizing and then delivering that to their customers is a key element that we see expanding the market, but it has to be driven by the business model around delivering services that ride on top of it. So it's not just a pure infrastructure as a service play. There's value-add components both in the cloud services and in the management services that really create that market opportunity that the partners can come in and benefit from.
Right. So we definitely have run over time. There are a couple more questions in queue. We're going to follow up with those askers individually. I want to thank everyone for sending your questions through. If there are additional questions, I'm going to leave the chat function open in a couple of minutes just so we can get those from you. As I mentioned here, unfortunately the social media links are not there. So you can go either to SlideShare, like I said, is slideshare.net/TBRI _market_insight, and our YouTube channel is TBRI channel. So you can look for us both of those places on those social media links, as well as following Allan and Jill here on Twitter. As you're leaving the webinar, we are asking that you send through just a quick brief survey about the quality of the presenters, the quality of the content, and any open-ended comments that you can give us on areas you'd like to see us delve into in more detail, other areas we should be focusing on. That feedback is very important to us, and we will be incorporating that into our research agenda. We thank you all for your time today, and we will be doing this again, obviously, next quarter. So if we don't hear from you between now and then, hopefully you'll join us again next quarter, and have a great rest of your summer. Thanks, everyone. Have a great afternoon.